What's going on, everybody? Welcome to We the People podcast. My name is Brett Maurer, and I am the host of this podcast. And I'm very excited because today I am introducing a new segment on the channel. This is going to cover different ancient mythologies. So the video I'm doing today is going to cover the origin myth of the world. Or the origin myth of Greek mythology. And then the next video that you're going to see on this channel will either be of the Norse mythology or the Egyptian mythology. I want to cover those three big ones first and foremost, and then as I start running out of stories to tell about those mythologies, I want to start incorporating some other ones, some maybe Native American mythologies and other cultures from around the world. So today we are talking about the kind of birth of the Greek mythological religion. And it all started with the earth and the sky creating what became the cosmos and the Titans that ruled within it. So like all mythologies and religions, there is an origin story. And these origin stories always start with chaos. There was simply chaos. Just gaping, open emptiness. And then either by itself or out of some kind of void, there sprang the original deities. So for the faith of Christianity, obviously God springs out of chaos and forms it. In this case with Greek mythology, we see that there are three kind of primordial deities. This is Gaia, which is the earth, Tartarus, which is the underworld, and Eros, which is love. Then, once Eros came into being, so the personification of love, Gaia and Chaos, who in Greek mythology are considered two female deities, were able to procreate and shape everything that became part of the universe. So their children that they gave birth to were Erebus, who personified darkness, Nyx, who was night, and Erebus and Nyx were kind of in a union. You know, the darkness and the night worked together. And out of this union came Hemera. Hemera was the personification of the day. Some of the other children that came from Gaia and Chaos include Moros, who was fate, the Black Care, who was doom, Thanatos, who was death, Hypnos, who was sleep, and so many others. This includes the personifications of dreams, of age, pain, sexual pleasure, strife. There's so many different things that were given birth and personification between the original, I guess I want to say the original birth from these two deities. During this time, Gaia also gave birth to Uranus. Uranus was the personification of the starry night sky, and he became her husband. The earth came out of darkness so long ago that, according to Greek myth, nobody knew when or how. And the earth, Gaia, was at the time young and nothing lived on her yet. And she was lonely. But then, after the birth of Uranus, and he took his form above her, she was set over with sparkling stars. And it is said that he was so incredible and gorgeous and magnificent to behold that the young earth looked at him and fell in love. And every night the sky would smile down at her and twinkle over her with his countless stars. And that is when they joined each other in love. Soon after they fell in love, she became known as Mother Earth, because she became the mother of all things living on her. All of her children loved their warm mother, but they also feared their father, who became Lord of the universe. The two of them gave birth to the first race that inhabited the earth. They were the first gods and became known as the Titans. It is said that they were taller than mountains and that she created them to kind of serve as the rulers of both the earth and sky. There were 6 of them in the beginning, gods and goddesses, or as we know them, the Titans and the Titanesses. When Gaia gave birth again after the Titans, her husband Uranus was not pleased. For these new children, he viewed them as disgusting. The Titans looked of what we humans look. They had the image of people. But the second time she gave birth, this was to the Cyclopses. She gave birth to 3 Cyclops, and each one of them had one huge glowing eye set in the middle of their forehead. She named them Lightning, Thunder, and Thunderbolt. While they were not handsome gods, they were tremendously strong blacksmiths. And they created some of the most beautiful items adorned by both the Titans and later by the gods of Olympus. Sparks from their heavy hammers and their forges would flash across the sky and light up the heavens so brightly that the stars in the sky faded at night, and this angered their father. After a while, there was another birth, and Mother Earth gave birth to 3 more sons. And her husband viewed them with even more disgust, for each of them had 50 heads, and 100 strong arms. He hated to see such ugly creatures walk across the earth, walk across his wife, inhabit his wife. So he decided to seize them. He seized both these 100-handed creatures and their brothers, the Cyclops, and threw them into the deepest, darkest pit of the earth, which later became known as the underworld, or also Tartarus. After this, Mother Earth could not forgive her husband, for she loved all her children and he was so cruel to them. So out of the hardest flint from within her skin, she created a weapon. This weapon took the shape of a harvesting sickle. And she told her children and her sons, the Titans and the Titanesses, you must take this weapon and end the cruelty of your father. You have to set your siblings free from Tartarus. Now, most of the Titans and the Titanesses feared their father, and they wanted nothing to do with this fight. But then the youngest Titan, Cronus, he stepped forward and took the sickle up. Now, he may have been the youngest, but he was also considered the strongest. He attacked his father, and his father could not withstand the weapon. And so he fled, and he gave up his powers. And from the results of the battle, his blood spilled on the earth. New creatures came from the remains of Uranus. And from his blood that was spilled on the earth during this battle emerged the giants. Also came the nymphs and the Furies. Now, the giants, the tree nymphs, and the Furies become more important later on in Greek mythology, but this was their origin. From the sea foam that was produced from body parts that were cut from him during this battle, it is said that is where Aphrodite came from, as we will find out later on as I tell more of these stories. So then Cronus became the new king, for his father had fled. And so, after taking the throne, Mother Earth created Pontus, who was the boundless seas, and he became her second husband. And from their union came the gods of the watery depths. Their children included Nereus, who was considered the old man of the sea, Thomas, who was the wonder of the sea, and he was the embodiment of the sea's danger and different dangerous aspects. And he would later become the father of the Harpies. And Mother Nature also began to create new life. So all across her began to grow rich forests and trees growing up the mountains and slopes, and flowers and new creatures, animals and sprites, and even the first man began to emerge. After this battle, Cronus became the Lord of the universe and took his father's power. He sat on the throne of the sky. For a while, he ruled over heaven and earth with both a firm hand, but also a guiding knowledge and patience. This was considered the golden age of men. Men lived happily and in peace with each other and with the Titans, or at the time the gods. In fact, it is said that at this time there were no locks on doors because there was only peace. Men did not kill each other, they did not steal, for theft and murder had not even been invented yet. But during his time ruling the sky, Cronus did not free his siblings, who his father had so cruelly locked in Tartarus. And Mother Earth became enraged with him. And it is then that she began to plot the downfall of her son. She had to wait because there was no god yet born that was strong enough to oppose him. But she knew that eventually one of his children would be stronger than him, just as Cronus was to his father, and would be able to overthrow him. But Cronus was not stupid. He knew this also. So, as the story goes, every time Cronus and his wife, Rhea, had a child, he would take the newborn child and swallow it. Because if all of his children were locked inside of his body, he had nothing to fear. Now, keep in mind, the Titans are immortal beings, as are their children, the gods of Olympus. So Cronus swallows his children, but they are alive inside of him. They continue to grow. So as Rhea mourned and watched as all of her sisters and brothers, the other Titans and Titanesses, married and had children and surrounded themselves with family, she was forever alone. Then it became time that Rhea would give birth to her sixth child. She asked Gaia, she asked Mother Earth to help her, for she could not risk the sight of another one of her children being swallowed by her husband. Mother Earth had been waiting for this moment, so she whispered advice to her daughter, and Rhea took the newborn child, who she named Zeus, and hid him. She wrapped a stone in the baby's clothes and gave it to her husband. And Cronus swallowed the stone, thinking it was his newborn son. And this fooled him. And so, Rhea took her newborn son Zeus and hid him in a cave on an island. This island became known as Crete. Cronus never heard the cries of his newborn child, or heard him as he grew up, because Mother Earth was smart and set noisy earth sprites outside the cave. And they made such noise, beating their shields and swords together, that any sounds of a crying child or a child growing up was hidden from the cosmos. She also put nymphs in charge of nursing and raising Zeus. Zeus was tended by these nymphs and nursed by a fairy goat. And this goat was a special goat because from the horns of this goat flowed ambrosia and nectar. This is what we know to be the food of the gods. And if anybody reads the Percy Jackson series or has read it, you will know that in that novel, in that series, they use ambrosia and nectar to heal and to recover from illness and injury. But they are unable to consume too much of it, for it can have negative effects on them because demigods are not full gods. But Zeus is a full god, and so he is fed ambrosia and nectar, and he grows up rapidly. And it is not long before he comes out of the cave as a full-grown, strong, powerful god. To thank the nymphs for taking care of him for so long and so well, he gave them the horns of the goat. These were considered to be horns of plenty and never ending. They could never be emptied. From the hide of this goat, he made an impenetrable armor for himself. And this became known as the Exius. And this made him so strong that there was nothing Cronus could do in order to stop him. So young Zeus then chose Metis, who was one of the Titans' daughters, for his first wife. She was considered to be the goddess of prudence, and he needed her advice because soon he was to engage in a battle. So she warned him not to try and overthrow Cronus by himself, because for him to fight Cronus meant that he had to fight all of the other Titans and all of the Titans' sons. It would have been him against an army. So she advised Zeus to find strong allies. So they devised a plan and carried this out before the battle was to commence. So Metis then went to Cronus and tricked him, convinced him into eating a magic herb. And she convinced him that eating this plant would make him unconquerable. But instead, it made him so sick that he threw up not only the stone that he swallowed in place of Zeus, but also his other 5 children. So then, from his belly came fully grown, ready to fight, Hades, Poseidon, Hestia, Demeter, and Hera. These were the original gods of Olympus. All of them were strong, grown, and ready to fight, and they joined sides with Zeus. When Cronus then saw the 6 gods rising against him, he knew that his time was up, and so he surrendered his power and attempted to flee. But Zeus would not let him flee. Zeus took his power as Lord of the Cosmos and Lord of the Skies, and then locked him in Tartarus. And it is said that Cronus would remain locked in Tartarus until the end of days, when he would then emerge from Tartarus in order to fight the gods once again, and the world would then cease to exist. So Zeus was now Lord of the universe, but he did not wish to rule alone. So with his power that he had taken from his father, he shared it with his brothers and sisters, and each of them took up a mantle. But with this shared power and claim to rule, the Titans and their sons did not like it. They did not respect it, for Cronus was their king. And they refused to let themselves be ruled by these usurper gods. So they revolted, and they fought against Zeus. The only Titans that did not fight were Prometheus and his brother Epithamus. They joined Zeus because Prometheus was a Titan who could see the future, and he knew how this battle would end. He knew that Zeus and the gods would be victorious. Zeus then freed the sons of Mother Earth that were locked in Tartarus. Grateful to him, the 100-handed creatures decided to fight with him and gave him their strength. And the Cyclops agreed to forge mighty weapons for him and the gods. For Poseidon, they made the trident. And when this power was shared with Poseidon, he took on the powers of the sea and of the earth. And this power was molded into the trident the Cyclops made for him. And it was so powerful that when he struck the ground with the trident, the earth would shake. And thus Poseidon became the god of earthquakes. When he struck the sea, waves would rise to the size of mountains. And thus he took the power of the seas. For Hades, they made a cap. This became known as the cap of invisibility. so that he could strike his enemies without being seen. And this explains why after he becomes the ruler of the underworld, death is unseen. And for Zeus, they created the lightning bolts, for he held the power of the cosmos, and thus Zeus became the god of thunder. Together, the gods, with their weapons, fought the Titans. And they fought a long, bitter battle until eventually the Titans surrendered, and Zeus locked all of them in Tartarus. The 100 armed monsters were assigned to stand guard at the gates of Tartarus and see that no one ever escaped. Atlas, who was the strongest of the Titans, was, instead of being sent to Tartarus, sent to serve his sentence, carrying the world on his shoulders. He forever would hold the vault of the sky on his shoulders, separating the sky from the earth. Now, Mother Earth once again was outraged, because Zeus had now sent her children, her sons and her grandchildren, into Tartarus. And so, she created 2 new monsters. These monsters became known as Typhon and Echidna, and she sent them to attack Zeus. These creatures were so fearful that when the gods saw them, they changed themselves into animals and fled in terror. Typhon possessed 100 heads, and he was so tall that they touched the stars, and venom dripped from his eyes, and lava and red-hot stones poured from his mouth. He had a sound that hissed like 100 snakes and roared like 100 lions. And he grabbed mountains and threw them at the gods. And he spit molten lava at the gods. But Zeus was not afraid. And so he turned to fight. And when the other gods saw him taking a stand, they knew that they couldn't be stopped, and they came back and fought at his side. Once again, another terrible battle raged, and hardly anything was left living on planet Earth. But, once again, Zeus being the strongest, he was fated to win. Typhon then tore up a huge mountain that now is known as Mount Etna. And when he went to throw it at the gods, Zeus struck Typhon with over 100 thunderbolts. And it was so strong, the impact, that Typhon lost hold of the mountain, and it fell on him, trapping him underneath of it. And it is said that to this day, Typhon is trapped under that mountain and spits fire, lava, and smoke through the top of the mountain. Now, his wife, Echidna, escaped the destruction and went and hid in a cave. Zeus tracked her down and found her, and she was protecting their offspring. Their offspring became the monsters of future myth. Their children included the Hydra, the Sphinx, the Chimera, Ladon, Cerberus, and the Nemean lion. Zeus decided not to kill the cowering mother and her children, and instead let them live, for he would use these later as challenges to test heroes. After the failure of Typhon, Mother Earth gave up her struggle. She no longer plotted uprisings or the downfalls of gods, and focused more on healing her wounds from the war. She re-anchored the mountains, laid new shores for the sea, and re-guided and reshaped the rivers. To protect the rivers and nature, she created the river gods. These were ox-horned creatures that became later known as satyrs, nymphs, and created even more sprites. Each tree, each river, each spring, each lake had its own nymph, satyr, and so on, for protection and care. And during this time, the earth again became green and fruitful, and Zeus ruled in peace. And it was then that Zeus asked the one-eyed Cyclops, asked this incredible race of craftsmen to create a city, a palace for them to live in. Now, these creatures were great masons, as well as great craftsmen with metal. And so, on the top of Mount Olympus, which was the highest mountain in Greece, they created a palace. This palace was hidden in the clouds, and the goddesses of the seasons would roll them away whenever the gods wanted to come down to earth or return to the heavens. Only the gods could pass through the gates of the clouds. Iris, who was the messenger of the gods, had her own path down to earth, and she would scatter water droplets that would create a rainbow so that she could go from earth to Olympus. And it was then that the gods took up their mantle. And in the Palace of Olympus, the gods sat on their thrones. There ended up being 12 gods. And Zeus shared his power with all 12 gods, with his 6 brothers and sisters, and then with his 6 children, as well as the goddess of love. So remember, there were 6 original gods, 6 children of Cronus. And then he shared his power with the remainder of the gods and goddesses. So this is when the gods and goddesses then began to take on their own aspects of rule. Zeus took the highest throne for himself, for he was the strongest of the gods and the god of the universe. And always next to him sat his trusted thunderbolts. On his right sat his youngest sister, who he took for his bride. This was Hera. And then the other gods that joined him on the thrones in the sky were Ares, the god of war, Hephaestus, who was the god of fire and craftsmanship, Aphrodite, the goddess of love who sprang forth from the sea foam, and Hermes. Hermes was the herald of the gods. There was also Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, who sat with her daughter Persephone. On the other side of Zeus sat Poseidon, his brother, the god of the sea, and his other 4 children, Athena, the goddess of wisdom, the twin gods Apollo and Artemis, Dionysus, the god of wine and sensuality, And of these gods, Athena being the goddess of wisdom, Apollo, light and music, Artemis, goddess of the hunt, you know, they all had their own dominion and their own aspects of life that they had to watch over. Then, not sitting on the throne, but still holding a place in the palace, was Hestia. She was the oldest of the original 6 gods, and she became the goddess of the hearth. She had no throne, but she spent her time tending the sacred fire. This was the fire of civilization, the beacon of civilization, and she kept it glowing always. And every hearth on earth was an altar to her. She would later become known as the kindest and gentlest of the Olympians. The eldest brother, Hades, Zeus bestowed the charge of the underworld and of Tartarus, and he became the Lord of the Dead. Hades never went to Olympus, for he preferred the gloom of his palace in the underworld. Once again, the gods were immortal, and so they would rule forever. Most of the time, they would rule together peacefully and happily, feasting on ambrosia and nectar. But when their wills clashed, things would get violent. Seas would rage, earthquakes would erupt, and basically the world would react to the power of the gods. The gods would fight, and their powers would clash, and the world would suffer because of it. And that is basically the origin. That is the origin of Greek myth. Mother Earth is brought into being. She creates the sky. She and the sky create the original inhabitants of the earth. And then they create the Titans. The Titans overthrow the sky, take power, and then eventually they create the gods, and the gods do the same thing. And that's where we're going to stop for the day. So you now have the creation and origin of Greek mythology. And there are some other things that go into it. There are some origin stories for different gods, how they came into being. The birth of Apollo and Demeter and Athena. And there's even, the story behind how Aphrodite was graced with becoming a goddess. And I'll talk more about those next time. I think the next video I do for Greek mythology will be specifically on specific origin stories for the second generation of the gods. So this is going to, be Zeus's children, basically. And there's also going to be, after I do the origin story for some of these Greek gods, I want to go over the creation myth from Norse mythology. And after that, I will do the creation myth of Egyptian mythology. So I want to do all of the creation, and then, all of the... There's always a story for each mythology where there's a power struggle among the gods, and things kind of go from there. That's when chaos and peace and things are put into balance. So we have Greek. I'll do a Greek video next time. After that, there will be Norse and then an Egyptian, and we will continue throughout the story of Greek, Egyptian, and Norse mythology. Make sure you hit the subscribe button, the like button. Make sure you share this, leave a comment, let me know what you think. Make sure you check out our other pages. There's one on history, there's one on politics. You're going to be seeing some new videos for Black History Month popping up in the history section. So make sure you're on the lookout for that content, and I'll see everybody next time.